Welcome to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, everybody. I am excited today. We have a great show in store for you. I'm talking to Julie Thompson, and we're going to go some places in this podcast that we honestly need to talk about. Julie has a great background, and so I'm excited to get into this because we're going to talk a little bit about her career path and how, career paths are not necessarily typical career paths. So, an example of how you can get to where you are in your career. But also, we're going to jump in and talk about some other topics around corporate social responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are some hot topics right now that your organization needs to be considering so you don't end up having some risks pop up that you don't want to have pop up and cost you millions of dollars. So, with that, let's roll the episode. Hi, I'm Jason Mefford, and you're in the right place to start transforming your career and life with this podcast. I've been in the trenches as an executive leader, and now I'm an executive coach and confidential advisor to executives all over the world. I use a multidisciplinary approach to improve learning that drives transformation by getting to the root cause in a practical, no-nonsense way. I love learning and sharing what makes people tick. You get both education and entertainment, since learning shouldn't be boring, right? But that's enough about me. This podcast is a combination of intuitive leadership, neural influence, and mental mastery to take your career and life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting to improve yourself, develop stronger relationships professionally and personally, make quicker, better decisions, and become a more effective leader, then of course, this podcast is for you because you are going to learn how to manage emotions in yourself and others, avoid burnout, stress, and anxiety, master your mind, get people to listen and take action, and become a lifelong learner. And when you do that, you will have a positive mental attitude, executive leadership presence, and the skills to know exactly what to say and do in any situation. I'm glad you're here. So, let's get started. Hey, Julie, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Well, I'm excited. I know, we usually we have the benefit of the green room beforehand, so I know a little bit about what is coming, and I'm excited because it's tangentially our careers kind of crossed a little bit because I was responsible for some of the stuff around EH&S, CSR
Yes.
kind of stuff as part of my career too. Something I'm pretty passionate about as well. But I know, when we were talking, you said you didn't take the typical career path. And so, a lot of people listening, they could be an internal audit, or, a lot of people do listen to that. I mean, some people may not be an internal audit anyway, but I think it's always interesting to kind of hear what someone's career path is so that nobody who's listening thinks, oh my gosh, I'm locked in and this is all that I can do. No, folks, career path can take you anywhere. In fact, most of us end up someplace that we never would have expected, right? I think that's kind of what happened to you, right, Julie?
Absolutely, and well said. Yeah, and actually, we also had a little bit of a discussion. You mentioned that when we're all young and we're thinking about what we're going to do when we grow up, it's the fireman, the policeman, the teacher, the nurse, maybe it's a stay-at-home mom, whatever that might be. But I never even heard of an internal auditor when I was young.
Yeah.
So that clearly was not on my radar. However, I did end up going to the University of Kentucky where I received a bachelor's degree in accounting. And this was back in, yes, I will admit it, 1983. And that date will only become important because of some specific requirements that fortunately for some of the younger listeners are no longer in place.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in college, the typical career path was you graduated, you got a job in an accounting firm, hopefully for most people, they were looking to go into one of the, at that time, big 8 accounting firms. And if not, it was fine if you ended up in someplace else, but it was typically accounting to do auditing, no less. And then from there, you found the perfect client and you ended up with a job there, and it was going to be in some sort of finance or accounting role. And then away your career went until you rose to the top. Well, in my case, I didn't land that job in public accounting when I first got out of school. It turned out to be good news, though, because I did land a job in Lexington where my family still was. So I was still able to live with mom and dad for a period of time at a company called Island Creek Coal Company. So I went to work instead of in public accounting in corporate accounting. And that was a wonderful education for me. And I was exposed to auditing because of the external auditors and internal auditors. I still had to work with them as I was doing some of the more mundane accounting activities. And then what happened was I passed the CPA exam. Well, that's when that 1983 date comes back into play. In those days, once you passed the CPA exam, you had to get 2 years of not just accounting experience, but public accounting experience. That sent me then on the path of finding a job in public accounting. I narrowed down a few cities. Long and the short of it, I ended up working for Pete Marwick Mitchell in Dallas, Texas. So then I was doing, the typical auditing, but it would have been third-party auditing, working too many hours a week than I want to even admit now. But there were still advantages.
Been there.
And many people on this call either have been or will be going through the same thing. But I was exposed to a lot of different industries. The hope again was that I would then jump back on that typical track, find the perfect client, end up there. That did not happen again. And instead, I got a call from a headhunter and I ended up with a job at Ryder Truck Rental in Miami, Florida, who had nothing to do with Pete Marwick Mitchell in Dallas. Ended up going into their internal audit department, spent about 4 years there, was asked to do their very first audit of the environmental function. And in those days, it was early days. So I basically had a blank sheet of paper. That by itself, I found very intriguing. And it took me less than 24 hours after receiving that assignment. I was literally on the phone calling my parents saying, "You will not believe what I get to do." And most people thought that was nuts. By the way, including all the managers in the department, none of them wanted this job because they had some sort of an idea of having to read environmental regulations. The rest of it is pretty much history. I stayed there in that position for a little over 5 years. And I moved away from there when Ryder Truck Rental wanted me to go back into the accounting function for, an upward movement. I gave it a shot and found I just simply wasn't happy, and I really missed the environmental side of things. So I just went off and started my own company, knew I was taking a little bit of a risk, but thought, I'm still young, there's plenty of time. And if it doesn't work out, guess what? I'm still a CPA. So I had a backup plan. I've never had to use the backup plan, but I have still kept it all these years, just in case. And it has come in handy.
And I think that's important because, again, a lot of people who listen to this are, they're earlier in their career and they're trying to figure out where to go. But a couple things that you said there that are important, right? You had a backup plan. You were a CPA. One of the reasons why I got an accounting degree and a CPA was the same reason, right? You can always get a job as a CPA.
Yes.
So there's always something to fall back onto. I have that, plus my father was a general contractor. So I grew up on job sites. I mean, if I needed to, I could strap on that work belt again and go build houses because I know how to do that. Now, again, just like you said, luckily, I've never had to build houses. I haven't had to go back and be a CPA, right, since I kind of left the accounting area. But there's kind of a takeaway for everybody who's listening, right, is as you're going through your career, whatever it looks like, you're going to be accruing, I'm using an accounting term there just to be funny, different skill sets that will serve you or allow you to fall back onto them, even if it doesn't work out, right? Like you said, if it doesn't work out, I can always go back. But for you, it worked out because you've been doing it for over 20 years now, right?
Yes, it has worked out very well. The other thing I would like to add to what you said is even my nieces and nephews, I recommend to each of them as they are growing up, when they get to the college level, I don't care what your interest is, you need to take at least one accounting class. You
Mm,
need to understand numbers. It doesn't matter what business you're in. It doesn't matter if you own your own business, whether you work for someone else, you need to understand the numbers.
yep.
Then in my case, because of this switch over, particularly starting in environmental, I mean, that's very technical. I was fortunate that Ryder, when I moved into their environmental department, they provided a lot of training. But once I got on my own, me understanding numbers and being able to talk to people from a technical perspective as well, that opened up doors that would never have been opened up had I not known the numbers.
Yeah. Very true.
So,
Very true.
yes.
Well, now maybe let's kind of transition because there's some three-letter acronyms that I want to throw out there
Sure.
that'll just kind of get us talking, right? So again, there's acronyms and they change over time, but we're gonna say some things. So I just want to kind of help define them for people, right? So you've already used EH&S, right? So EH&S, environmental, health, and safety, right? I got
Correct.
that right? Okay.
Yes.
Making sure I should. That's an old term that I'm familiar with too, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Now there's a new term that people are throwing out there, ESG, right? So what does ESG stand for?
ESG is environment, social, and governance.
Okay. Environmental, social, and governance. So that's a newer term that a lot of people previously had been referring to as CSR, I think, right? Corporate social responsibility.
Well, CSR would typically fall under probably the S and or the G piece, because CSR is
Right.
corporate social responsibility.
Responsibility.
And
Yep.
so you would have the social aspects, but CSR goes beyond into that governance piece as well. So you would have some overlap in both the S and the G.
Okay, so the ESG is really kind of pulling together the concepts from EH&S and CSR under the same umbrella.
Yes.
Okay. See, everybody, I'm getting educated too because I grew up doing and managing, and leading EH&S and CSR functions, but now they would be called ESG. So if you hear that term, that's what it means. Now, a third term that I think, as we talked before, kind of ties under this is a new one that I hadn't heard, but DEI, right? And so
Yes. So
DEI, what
D
does that stand for, and how does that tie into everything too?
Sure. So DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some of this is not going to be new as far as what it represents, but it is kind of a new term, much of which has come out of what has been going on in this country and around the world, obviously for years, but particularly in the last year with racial injustice. But it goes beyond just racial injustice. And so it's a concept that businesses and other organizations are adopting, that they are really focusing in on making sure that their workforce is in fact diverse. And that could be diverse, though, not only from skin color, it includes physical characteristics, your religion, your sexual orientation, your gender, physical disabilities. And then a new term I've learned recently is neurodisabilities, which just is a reference to people's brains work differently, which is actually quite an interesting idea, even though it sounds very simplistic.
Well,
So,
because it's interesting that you say that because it's not actually, I mean, the word disable, it's like handy capable. I'm not handicapped, I'm handy capable because I know Temple Grandin, who has autism. She has been big on this for a long time of trying to help, severely autistic people integrate more into some of these areas because, again, she says, look, our brains work different. And so there's certain problems or certain challenges that an autistic person can see from a different way of looking at it than the rest of us that can have a huge impact. And I mean, I love that woman because she has been an example of that in her own life in some of the changes in, agribusiness, cattle slaughtering, other stuff like that, of more humane ways of actually harvesting animals for food, that she came up with, because again, her brain works different than other people, so she could solve a problem that other people couldn't solve. But if she wasn't included in the process, we would never have that, right? And a lot of these great inventions, great process changes are done by the people that most of us think are a little crazy. So
Yes,
we need more crazies around us.
we do. We do. And I think there's a huge opportunity. And I don't know, we hadn't planned on going off on this tangent, but I'm going to head there anyway,
Let's
just to
go.
give
We
you a
can go
heads up.
wherever we want to go.
Yes. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion for many, many, many months, and very specifically with respect to DEI and auditing. And then you take it another level, but DEI and EHS auditing, because there's a big difference between financial auditing, and you would know this, but some of your listeners probably won't, but there's a big difference between financial auditing and EHS auditing. There's actually a number of differences, but some of the bigger things are that you tend to spend less time looking at documentation on an EHS audit, and you spend a lot more time with what they call boots on the ground.
Yep.
So you are walking through facilities, whether that's a manufacturing facility, whether it's an agribusiness, whether it is, I've been on tankers that are holding oil and brown water, and on bridges that are 200 feet above a river. I mean, there's a lot more of getting out, and you're not just in the arena with people in offices. Not that you don't spend some time there. So now we've been forced into this virtual audit environment. And my thinking has been, are we slowly missing this opportunity as we get back to business with respect to people that may fit into that DEI category, but not based on their skin color or their religion, but on the disability side? So either with a physical disability or potentially a neuro disability. So the example you gave, autism, is one that I have been thinking about. There are many autistic people that are just brilliant in the way that they think and the things that they see, but they may have some struggles with or not be as good as other people with their social skills. Well, maybe they can be part of an audit because they don't have to do the interviewing. Instead, they can be looking at the processes, the procedures, and how the things are really put together and how they work, and come back and give their perspective. The same thing with people with physical disabilities. In my career, and I just had this discussion the other day with someone, so I've been auditing now for 3 decades. In 3 decades, I have worked with one person that had a physical disability. One person in 30 years. Now, I think, again, with this virtual world, this is the time to be thinking about, are there people with physical disabilities that we could welcome into this, and even start looking at the college level education of encouraging them and saying, hey, this is a career that would be open to you, because they can do parts of the audit, virtually. I think the hybrid audit, part virtual and part in person, it's here to stay. And in some areas, it may be solely virtual 5 or 10 years from now. So that's some of where my brain has been going with this DEI stuff.
Well, no, and let's go down that further too, right?
Sure.
Because again, it's the auditors as a group tend to be rather homogenous, right? We're
Yes.
all alike in a lot of ways, and like you said, the typical career path for somebody to come into auditing, like you said, accounting degree, CPA, big four experience, right? So there's a lot of people that have had kind of some of the same experiences. There is a lot of, again, in all ways, it's a rather homogenous from a personality perspective as well, right? Because it attracts people that have a certain personality, and so a lot of people with that personality tend to gravitate to this job. But again, are we doing ourselves a disservice by not trying to be more inclusive, right, of people with different personalities, with different backgrounds, with different, whether they're neuro or physical, disabilities in a way, because like you said, it's, you know, just because somebody's blind or somebody can't hear or someone's confined to a wheelchair doesn't mean they can't do most of the work that's done, right? I mean, yes,
Exactly.
if a person is bound to a wheelchair, you're not going to ask them to climb up on top of a grain silo and stick their head in.
Right.
But you could probably use a drone now in these
Yeah.
days. I mean, technically we could, right? They could be sitting down there and fly a drone up and look down in, right? That's a lot better than sticking my head in like I used to have to do, especially with some of the things like fish soluble tanks. Oh man, you got to hold your breath. But but I think that's a great point. Is our how can we be more diverse, provide more equity, right? And equity can be pay, other different things as well, and how can we be more inclusive? Because I mean, we know there's lots of research. The teams that are more diverse and more inclusive, they perform better than other teams.
Absolutely. And both the equity and the inclusion piece, I don't want to shortchange those because they are just as important in probably everybody's mind. So going back to the inclusivity, so it isn't just enough to have people that look different or think differently on your team. You do need to make efforts to make sure they are included. And included doesn't mean they're just sitting around a table, while everybody else is talking. It is meaning soliciting the ideas from them. I mean, they are going to be able to contribute a perspective that the others in the room are not going to be able to keep them engaged, to talk to them. Do they feel like they are being included? Do they feel like they're being excluded in other things? And I just think that we've got some real opportunities there, but it is important to make sure that people on both sides feel comfortable having the discussions and making adjustments to improve that. And then on the equity side, as you said, it's not just about pay. It's about things like, does everybody have the same opportunities? And maybe they don't, but maybe it's because of something you're not even aware of. So maybe your organization offers to pay for college. Well, the single mom of 3 kids that are in grade school, and that woman or man may not be able to find the time to do it. So is that really a benefit to them? And how can you work with them? Are there other adjustments at work that you might be able to provide to help them take advantage of things like that? So equity is much bigger than, I think even when I went into it, I was thinking, well, it ought to be pretty easy to adjust everybody's pay, right? Well, it's far
No,
more.
it is not.
Like,
I
right,
can
well,
tell
it
it
is.
is. Yeah. No, because I know I actually had a person on my team, female. She came in with less experience, so obviously, HR said this is the pay level where she needs to be. Okay, um, put her in at that level, but very quickly she rose up and was performing much better than the rest of her peers. The problem was I was handcuffed by HR. I was not allowed to pay her what her value was at the time because it exceeded the stupid pay requirements that HR had, right? And that's an example of equity, from the pay side. I mean,
Yes.
everybody who's managing people and doing stuff, it is a fact. Okay, you can argue all you want, but it is a fact that women earn less than men and minority groups earn less than whites. Okay, it's
Yes.
just a fact, and that is something that we need to fix because equal work should be equal pay. So if
Yes.
that's not what's happening in your group, I'm preaching a little bit because it does piss me off. If it's not that way in your organization, try to get that fixed. But I love what you said too about there's other parts of equity. And what we've tried to do for so long is treat everyone exactly the same. But we are not all exactly the same.
No.
And so again, maybe it's, again, equitable for, you know, hey, if somebody can do the work that everybody else does in 30 hours that normally would take 40 hours, wouldn't it be okay to just only make them work 40 or 30 hours but pay them for the 40? Or like you said, if you've got the single parent with little kids at home, Wouldn't it be equitable to allow them to have a flexible schedule,
Yes.
right? And be compassionate and loving towards that person and allow them to take care of their responsibilities. And again, everybody's different, right? So,
Yes.
oh, we offer great benefits, but are those benefits good benefits for everybody? Or is kind of the cafeteria plan, like you can pick this and pick that? Some people would just rather have the cash, and other people would prefer to have the benefits. So hopefully some of these discussions will get organizations to finally pull their head out and maybe offer more of a menu of benefits for people that is more equitable for each person and not necessarily the same across the whole thing.
Yes.
All right, I'm off my soapbox. Let's go back. Let's talk about
That's
something.
okay. No, I enjoyed that. We need people on their soapboxes from time to time. So good.
Well, because it is, I think it's, and as we talked before too, some people might kind of poo-poo this and say, "Oh, this is just, the latest fad thing. It'll
Yes.
go away." It's not going away. And
No.
if you don't address it, it will cost your company millions and millions of dollars. Okay. So this is a real risk that needs to be addressed, right? This is what one of the reasons why we're talking about it today, because I don't know that enough people actually are.
Yes. No, I agree. It is most definitely a risk. I mean, you've got you first of all, you've got the risk that if you are not addressing it within your organization, people are aware of these issues. Who are you going to get that wants to work for you? So you're going to lose the best talent because they're going to go to the organizations that are addressing this. And then secondly, if you don't have the right work environment, you will find yourself at the wrong end of a lawsuit. Now, whether you're successful or the other party is successful, think of the time, the money, the energy that is spent on that in fact should be spent on activities that actually make money or auditing. So
Give the auditors more money.
that's right.
But I think it's interesting. So, again, I mean, we kind of talked about ESG and the whole, the older CSR, EH&S. And I know again, we're old enough that we remember this too, where people would say, "Oh, that's poo-poo kind of stuff as well, right? This will go away. Environmental's not that big of a deal." In fact, I used to work for a guy, and I mean, it was okay in the 1930s, right, for him to do this because we didn't know. But he said at one point, he's like, "Do you know why I built all my factories next to the rivers? So I could dump all my crap in them, right? Because that's just what everybody did
Yes.
back in the 20s and 30s." Now, then we realized it wasn't okay, but a lot of people then thought, well, we can't afford to do this, right? Both from a CSR, EH&S standpoint. But what did we learn? It actually costs less in the long run to do it right than to do it what we think is cheap and then have to pay afterwards, right? And again, you've spent decades in this area, so is that right? Am I thinking about this right?
You are thinking about it absolutely correctly. And I think, first of all, over time, I think some costs have, in fact, come down as demand, just as you would expect, typical supply and demand. As there's greater demand, then the costs come down, and some of those have been a little bit easier on the decision making. But it goes beyond just the costs going in. Now there's a big emphasis on taking a look at your suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
Your customers are looking at you as well. So if you go back to the suppliers, do you want to be doing business with someone who is not doing the right thing from an environmental, health, safety, social, diverse? I mean, you throw them all of that in there. If you are a supplier to other businesses, you can expect for your customers to be looking at you. And whether you like it or not, you should be looking at your suppliers for those same traits as well, to be doing the right thing in all of those areas, particularly as the next generation is coming up. They are very aware of these issues they're worried about, and they should be, about what kind of world that we are leaving them. And is it too late? They don't think it's too late. I don't think it's too late. I hope we're all right, but it's going to be too late if we don't, make the right efforts. But those are the customers of the future. Those are going to be the suppliers of the future. They are far more knowledgeable than I will ever be. on this. They are making much more sophisticated decisions in not only their buying choices, but their career choices. So you will lose the top talent if you're not doing the right things, because they are asking the questions when they're interviewing for a job. And the interviews don't last very long if you don't have the right answers, because that's not who they want to work for.
Yeah.
So it will cost you.
Well, and it's interesting because really all of these acronyms that we've been throwing out here today, right, is a lot of them started off being regulatory driven. Okay. When the EPA was set up, some of the different, environmental regulations, safety regulations, kind of came from the government of saying, look, companies, you're hurting your employees are dying, you're polluting the rivers, whatever, right? Yeah. So we're going to legislate or regulate, how you do business. And so there's always been, for a long time, that regulatory pressure to do the right thing. If we don't, if we're bad actors long enough, then the laws change and you can't do that anymore. What's interesting now, we still have that regulatory pressure, but just like you said, now we're starting to have some demand-driven stuff from our employees, from our customers, from our suppliers, that they're also requesting, and I think they're probably moving faster than the regulations will too. And that at the end of the day, again, you can ignore this. Go ahead and ignore it if you want to, but a lot of people aren't going to want to work for you or with you or buy from you going forward. And there's enough, watch groups, NGO, non-governmental organizations out there that are blowing the whistle on some of these things. So don't think you can hide, because in the day of the internet and everything else, everything eventually becomes made public one way or the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do, while I'm thinking about it, on the ESG side, we tended to talk about, environment, social, and then the governance side. For those that aren't really interested in a career, say, to be out walking around facilities, because some people might not want to walk across that bridge that's 200 feet over a rushing river.
I love doing that stuff.
Well, I don't. I'm scared of heights, and my client didn't tell me beforehand that was going to be part of the job. I managed to get through it, but I think I held my breath and walking across and clutching the railing. But anyway, with ESG, one of the big things is there is an effort, not just an effort, we're past an effort. It's an ongoing effort, would be a better way to put it, where we're trying to put numbers to these things. Mm-hmm. So we're quantifying them. And there's a number of organizations. ISO is working on something, GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, which has historically dealt with environmental and, social kinds of things fall under like their umbrella. So if you've got an accounting degree, whether you're interested in auditing or not, you very well could find yourself in a job where you are looking at these things and trying to quantify them. You will also see ESG has become very big on Wall Street. Some of the big investment firms are putting out their own models for how do you evaluate ESG, what are the specific components, how did we measure, on a scale of something, whether they were good or bad, and then how should that impact your investing decisions as either an individual investor or a much larger, an institutional investor. What is happening right now is those are not all in alignment. So if you look at something that Fidelity puts out versus, somebody else, State Street or Blackstone, BlackRock, they're all looking at this. They all have their different models, which does make it difficult to say, okay, well, this investment firm says this and this one says that, and how do they compare? It's almost impossible. But we're heading in a direction where at some point that's probably going to come somewhat closer together, at least for the public. But this is definitely going to be a big area. They are hiring people all over the world at high positions within these companies to be looking at ESG.
Yeah.
So this is the wave of the future, and it is not going to go away anytime soon. But there are career opportunities all over the place if you've been in the financial or auditing arena, in my opinion.
Well, and to kind of wrap this up, from where we even started, right? Your career was not necessarily a typical career. It kind of wound you around. You found this space. You fell in love with it. It's something that, obviously everybody that's listening, you can see that Julie's passionate about some of this stuff, right? And it's been a great career for you, as
Yes.
well. And so, same thing. Some of the people that are listening right now, hey, if some of these things that we've been talking about, diversity, equity, inclusion, ESG, some of this stuff, if that resonates with you, there are lots of jobs in these areas. And like you said, people are trying to ramp up. People are trying to ask the questions. I went to it was a conference about 2 or 3 years ago, of even trying to look at how do we hold corporations accountable from something other than a P&L? How do we create like at the time, CSR accountability statement to really show, is this a company that is a suck on society or somebody who actually makes society better off in totality, right? You might be making a lot of money, but if you're polluting and you're hurting and you're doing some of these other things that, like you said, we're trying to figure out how to quantify some of it. Once we figure out how to quantify it and we figure out who the net positive people are on this earth and who are the net negative, you hope your company is not one of those net negatives, because I can't imagine it's going to be very good for you going forward. So lots of jobs in the area as well. So
Absolutely. And you never know where you're going to end up. I don't know if I can say anything that is more true with respect to me. I certainly had no idea, definitely not as a youngster, because I didn't even know such a thing existed. But even in college, I thought I was going to be on that traditional path.
Yep.
So here I am.
Well, so did I. I mean, I was, again, when I was in college, I was going to be a partner at Arthur Andersen. That was my career track. And hey, then Enron happened and we imploded, and I never knew where I was going to go either. So that's very, very true. And so I think it's, a good reminder at the end too, to let people know, again, as you're thinking about your career, don't worry too much about it. Plan for it. Try to go where you want to go, but realize there's going to be twists and turns all along the way, and it's okay. And sometimes you just have to jump and do it. But, like Julie was talking about, have a backup plan just in case. Hey, if it doesn't work out, but more times than not, it works out exactly the way you're hoping to. So anyway, well, it's been great talking to you, Julie. Thank you. And
Likewise, and thank you. I enjoyed it.
Oh, I enjoyed it too. Got me up on my soapbox for a little bit. Now I'm going to get back down and we'll get back. But hey, thanks for coming on. I'm sure we'll probably have some other things we need to talk about in the future too. So you might have to be back on a future episode as well.
I would be happy to. Thank you again. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share with your friends and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know what you enjoyed the most about the podcast, and you may even be featured on a future episode. When you're ready to turbocharge your leadership development, join the Briefing Leadership Program, where you get access to everything in one place and can interact directly with me in the group. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy's video on-demand learning platform at ondemand.criskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you will also have access to hundreds of video on-demand learning opportunities. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.